Hello YouTube channel watchers, this is Ben again. It's Monday and I thought I would start the week off again with a new video. But I would start the week off on something I'd like to start doing more of, just for my own benefit. I mean, in a few years time I will be watching these videos again, and I'm already starting to find that when I look back at the videos I did at the beginning of the year, I'm already seeing such a big difference, and I love that I can just see myself back then and the person I used to be a year ago. So what I want to start doing, and it's something I do every year around Christmas time anyways, is I'd like to start answering questions. I have this wonderful book. I don't have a physical copy of it, unfortunately. It is on my list to get eventually. But it's 1001 questions to ask yourself for journaling. It's a really wonderful resource. There's quite a few out there. There's a lot of versions of this. There's a lot of websites as well that will offer you writing prompts. So, for example, 365 thought-provoking questions at markandangel.com. If you look up markandangel.com, just look for their post on 365 thought-provoking questions to ask yourself this year, and it's a same idea, right? So what I'd like to start doing is doing more videos where I answer a question, and then coming back to them in a few years' time and seeing if I still feel the same way, or if I feel different, and why? Because it's so easy to forget things, and it's so easy to not see progress. A lot of people in the fitness world will often say, you know, the best thing you can do for yourself when you're on a fitness plan, or if you're trying to weight gain, or not weight gain, if you're trying to build mass, or if you're trying to tone up, or if you're trying to bodybuild, best thing you can do is take pictures so that you can, you know, watch your progress as you go along. And I feel the same way about anything to do with your personality, your emotions, anything like that. I think that's why I love journaling, and I love scrapbooking especially, because growing up I didn't really have a lot of pictures taken. Well, we did and we didn't. My mum and dad were picture takers in the very early years, but they weren't really picture takers afterwards, and I wasn't. So anything that I can get my hands on that will remind me about how far I've come, I will do. So, 365 thought-provoking questions I was reminded of today. Some friends of mine's godmother posted on her page that she really enjoyed journaling because it allowed her, I think, what did she say? It allows her issues and problems and demons to be put onto a page, to be rationally looked at. And I thought that's an interesting way of working through to work through problems, is to kind of externalize it and come back to it. I like journaling myself because I find that it's like a love letter to myself. I throughout the years I've blogged and I've journaled and I've created scrapbooks and I've done this and I've done that, and right behind me actually is a big box full of keepsakes that I'm eventually going to digitize and archive. And so what I'd like to start doing, as I said, is start answering more questions so that in a few years' time I can actually look. So today I was just randomly choosing, closed my eyes, and I scrolled up and down and I chose, and the one I chose for today is, if we learn from our mistakes, why are we always so afraid to make a mistake? And it's funny that this comes up, because this really has been something both in class at the TAC and in my regular life that has been coming up again and again and again. And I spoke about this in my anger video from last week or the week before, about how I'm starting to realize how deeply the underlying insecurity of my whole life is abandonment. I feel like, well, I have had a lot of people abandon me in my life, and it hurts. It hurts a tremendous amount. when I was younger, although it wasn't intentional. I had to leave all of my friends in the UK, in Wales, because we moved to Canada. And at 8 years old, I was old enough that I could still, like, I was old enough that I built solid memories of back home. And then to suddenly at 8 years old be taken out from all of my friends, from the schools I was in, to come to a country where the language was the same but everything else was so different. It was tough. It was very difficult. And so, for me at least, I think I keep learning from the mistakes I make afterwards. And I do. Like, I mean, I'm not, I don't want to say that as from a place of pride. It is a reality, though. I try very, very, very hard to learn as much as I can whenever I've made a mistake. I see making mistakes as being a constructive and teachable moment. Obviously, some mistakes in our lives, and especially my life, were mistakes that we can't learn from. Very important that we don't make that type of mistake because they affect other people. But that being said, I think if we approach our lives from a place of continual improvement, the positive part of that would be that we are always working on ourselves, always making sure that we strive to be the best people that we can be. The downside of that, of course, is if we're always trying to improve ourselves, it means that we're not good enough. For me, I intellectually know I'm good enough. Emotionally speaking, I'm still really struggling with that. And so the question, why are we always so afraid to make a mistake? I think I'm at a place right now where certain aspects of my life I know I can make a mistake in because I'm still learning. Certain aspects of my life I know I shouldn't make mistakes because there are parts of my life where the stakes are just too high. So, for example, when it comes to money, I know I can't and I shouldn't just go out to a mall and just buy anything and everything I want, because then I won't have money for the things that are important in my life. For example, my boyfriend, my schooling, paying for rent for Miffwood next year, paying for my bills, right? And so I try as much as I can to learn from the mistakes that I make and ask for clarification and ask for feedback on things. And many times I do feel afraid to make a mistake. And I think, for me at least, where that comes down to is, at a very deep level, I feel like if I make a mistake, people will stop loving me, people will abandon me, people won't want me anymore. And also I think that feeling of, if I make a mistake, people may judge me for being weak, for being ill-informed, for being not who I should be or I'm supposed to be. And I think ultimately also it comes down to that feeling of being a fraud, I know a lot of people in the world feel that they are pretending in life or that they're frauds, and I'm no different. Sometimes I feel like everything I do in my life, all the accomplishments I've achieved, they're not mine to own because one day they'll eventually see that I'm not the person who I'm saying I am, right? Or at least that's the fear. That's the fear that, one day this personality I'm projecting out will be seen through as being false, and everything I've done, all of my genuine accomplishments, will be viewed as false and all of that. And I think, speaking to other people about these issues. I understand that a lot of people feel this way in life. You know, we're constantly comparing ourselves to others. We're constantly comparing ourselves to what other people are achieving. And when it comes to our own achievements, we have a skewed sense of our accomplishments. We have a skewed sense of our accomplishments because we're afraid to own those accomplishments, I think. I think a lot of people, myself included, especially myself, because it was drilled into my head so often as a kid that I was an extension of my family. And I'm not saying that bitterly. I'm not saying that with any kind of blame against my family, my parents especially. But it was a reality of the situation. When I was growing up, my parents' business came before anything else in their world, except for a few things like properly keeping us fed, properly clothing us. But there were many times where, you know, I wanted to go and do something, and because I didn't drive and we lived in a small village in the middle of nowhere, I wasn't able to go to those things because it conflicted with the business. And again, I'm not trying to be bitter about that. It was just the reality of the situation. But the business was what fed us all and what kept a roof over our heads, right? So, where was I going with that? That's the real problem making these videos, is, you know, you start talking, and then suddenly you lose track of yourself. So, I think a lot of people have this sense that they can't own who they are because who they are is very much dependent on other people. And I think for me, I don't like making mistakes because in my head I always hear that little voice saying, and interestingly it always comes out in that little voice is always the sound of my mum and dad all the time, is that you're not good enough, people will laugh at you, especially people will laugh at you. That was a big thing when I was growing up. Anything deemed to be different so I think okay, let me backtrack. So I think this is a very Northern English style idea. It's that whole idea of, oh, don't do anything, what would the neighbours think? Any kind of deviation from the norm is looked down upon as being antisocial, or as being weird or strange or anything like that. And I see it in my family. I see it in my extended family whenever, like, small little attitudes here and there. And so, at least for me, and I think a lot of people as well, there's this idea that we can't own our lives because of what other people think, those judgments, right? And it's interesting, when I was in class a few weekends ago, and I spoke about this in the anger video, when I was in class a few weeks ago and I was brought up for a demonstration in front of a class, and I stepped into that place of anger, I was also very, very worried, well, no, I wasn't very worried, but there was worry there, there was caution there, there was that feeling of, what are they thinking right now, are they judging me? And that whole theme of being judged was a constant thing in that course. Everybody who stepped into that place of anger, frustration, whatever it was that they were dealing with, also had that underlying subpersonality, that little voice, saying they're going to judge you, they're going to laugh at you, they're going to do all of these things. And it just wasn't the case. It's that perception issue. So I think why we're always afraid to make a mistake is because ultimately we're afraid of what other people think, and we're afraid of we're afraid of, at least, no, let me reframe that. I am afraid when I make a mistake that I am going to be abandoned. That's what it really comes down to. I'm afraid that any kind of little mistake I make will make people turn away from me. And I'm like thinking back on the past couple of years and all the people I've gotten to know through Mythwood, through the pagan community, through just general life. And I'm so afraid of fucking up, and I'm so afraid of making a mistake when it comes to important things, and not so important things. I fixate on that. I need to get this right. I can't make a mistake, because I'm afraid that they'll leave me, that they'll see through me, they'll think that I'm not who they thought I was, and that eventually they'll just say, we don't want you anymore. That's what it really comes down to. That's why I'm afraid to make a mistake. It just comes up in different variations of that. Like, for example, whenever I go over to somebody else's home, I'm on my best behavior, because I don't want to impose. And this has been something very interesting that I've been working quite a lot on. I haven't been working on it. It's been on my mind for the past couple of weeks, for the past 6 weeks. And I don't mind talking about this because it is a reality of my life right now. So when I met John about 6 weeks ago, I'd known him for about 8 months online. So I went down to Hamilton and we were hanging out, and I was so on guard, so polite when we went to some of his friends' homes. I was so making sure that I was minding my P's and Q's, that I was super polite, that I didn't take up too much space, that I wasn't sitting in the wrong place, And I think politeness is appropriate in circumstances where you're just meeting new people for the first time, but not to an extent where you're afraid that they'll suddenly think you're an asshole because you took an extra small slice of cake, or they'll regard you sitting in a certain way on the chair as being arrogant, or all of these things. And so when I joined Lukumi, or when I began that process, John led the way, really. It was his cultivation of that relationship with his padrino and his madrina to begin with, which in many ways introduced me to that community. But in how elays usually work is that your godfather or your godmother's house, physical house where the altars are, where the shrine is kept, is made available to you. And so my padrino and his partner made it quite clear to me that I would always be welcome in the house. And I have been staying over at their place quite often when I needed a place to stay for school. Where I live right now, it's about 3 hours away from Toronto, and so if I go down to class on a weekend, it's a lot more convenient if I stay quite close by to a school overnight, as opposed to driving all the way up and then driving all the way back in the morning. Not only is it cheaper on gas, but it's also a lot better for to stave away exhaustion, right? So it was made aware to me that I could always go over and sleep over at their place, and this past weekend I went down to hang out with them both, and I'm still dealing with that whole idea of me being an imposition. Like, I feel like if I take them up on the offer, I don't want to be imposing on them. And I think that's healthy to a certain degree, because I wouldn't want to, with anybody, I wouldn't want to overstay a welcome. But that crippling feeling of not wanting to come across a certain way, like a moocher, it cuts so deep, right? And it cripples me in many ways, because it's like I can't accept other people's hospitality without giving back, because I feel like they would judge me for it. This is also shown in all this year and last year when I joined Mythwood, it was the exact same thing. For many months last year, I didn't have a barbecue at Mythwood, and I didn't have any way to cook food. So what would often happen is I would either take over my food that was microwavable, but then what started happening was my neighbours would feed me or offer me food, and out of politeness at first, yes, by all means, I'd love to accept something from you, but it got into my mind the idea that I needed to give back equal for equal, because I have this big issue with accepting kindness from people. I have this big issue that I need to repay it in exactly the same way, because if I don't, then I'll be seen as this moocher, I'll be seen as this person who always takes and never gives back. And I really fixate on this. And it comes back to that whole idea of I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want people to see me, and I don't want people to look at me as being a taker and not a giver, right? And this ties into another aspect of weird, quirky part of my personality, where, and I spoke about this definitely in the anger video as well, and it's something I share with my father, is that generosity. I give so often to people, partly because I feel like what I can give would be good for them, or at least trying to offer it to them. Oh, that's the phone, one moment. Oh, just to prove that this is actually a real live video right now. It's not live as you're watching it, but it is. I record and I don't edit. Half because I don't really want to edit something that I just like stream of consciousness wise. I have a hard time accepting things from people, because I feel like I just need to give back in equal measure. And if I don't give back in equal measure, then I fear like they'll see me negatively, and again, they'll abandon me. It's very interesting when you start to realize that about yourself, like little things like that, because like I can just see the trail in my mind, and it's so covert. As I'm doing it, I don't realize it. It's not something that comes into my mind, and I find it especially interesting because I know intellectually that my friends would love me anyways. They understand. So like with the case of the barbecue, for example, it becomes a huge thing in my mind when really it isn't. It's like that whole idea of like little things will just build and build and build and build and build, and that's how insecurities usually are, right? Insecurities often come out like that, and they just take over, and they become way bigger than they actually should be. So then the responsibility part of that is, now that I see it about myself, it's that idea of seeing it in a positive light. So the positive light is, so the negative voice in there is, I'm imposing and I'm taking away, and thus they'll start to dislike me for it. The positive voice in that is, I appreciate what they're doing for me. So for example, with my Padrino, is they're offering me a place to stay, and they're supporting me within reason, giving me a place to sleep so that my schooling will be easier. They also want to see me too. They also want to get to know me. They also want me to get to know them. That's the positive part. The constructive piece around that is, because they're offering and opening up their home to me, how can I give back to them in a way that would show my appreciation for what they're actually doing, as opposed to the negative voice, which is constantly on the lookout for them abandoning me, constantly on the lookout for my neighbours seeing me as a taker, as an arsehole, as a this and that, and abandoning me. Again, that whole idea of abandonment, right? So, to sum it all up, why are we always so afraid to make a mistake? Because of effing insecurities that need to go on holiday and leave us alone. That's ultimately what it comes down to. Alright, so this, it's time for me to go. Thank you so much. If you're listening to this, thank you. And to my future self, just know that I love you, and I hope you love me. Have a good day. Bye-bye.